My grandmother, I call Mom, was just turning teenage in the 1800s, later 1800s. In fact, a whole family of 9 children. She had brothers and sisters, and they were just, like I said, turning to teenage at the time when the white culture came. And so when they were growing up, they didn't have all the conveniences now we have, like food from stateside, flour, sugar, and all those types that the white culture brought up, the miners brought up when Nome, when the discovery of gold was in Nome. And both my grandmother, Mom, and her older sister, their mentality was survival. Because if they didn't put away greens, dry fish, and berries for the winter enough to last them till the next summer, there would be starvation. So being raised my step grandmother, which I call Mom, and her older sister, and that generation before me, that was their lifestyle. It was survival. I learned a lot by going camping with my grandmother and her older sister, for fishing in the spring, in the summer, early summer, going berry picking. We had to go camping because we didn't have transportation like we do now. We took boats and go camping where the berries were. Go camping had fish camps where the fish were, where we catch fish and dry them. And also then after that, in the fall time, first 2 weeks of September, every fall we would go squirrel hunting up to the hills. Same way in the springtime, we would go squirrel hunting with dog team and stay out there from 1st of May till about 20th of May to come home after squirrel hunting just before breakup. But we would go to Head of Bonanza and try and be there by the 1st of May and hunt squirrels as the squirrels came out of their holes. Because if we wait too late, even a week, the squirrels, soon as they come out, the males especially, would start fighting and chew one another up. And if you want good skins in the springtime, you had to be there, so as each squirrel came out, you set a trap and caught them. And the same thing in the fall time. Those two women would go squirrel hunting again in the first 2 weeks of September on the road system on East Fork, about 20 or 25 miles probably up the road. Could be less. And each time we went squirrel hunting, we would be gone a little over 2 weeks. And we set traps, number one traps. I would have 50 traps. And of course, once we set them out, we never brought the traps home, or so once we set them out, the next 2 weeks, a little over 2 weeks, we just keep moving them. And as in the summertime, if you set your traps in a den, there's a family in there. As long as they're catching, you keep setting that 2-3 traps you have in that den. But once they stop catching, then you move your traps to another den. Or sometimes they would have a single hole where they would use for a hideout. Like when the hawks are flying, they had to, if they were out, feeding or collecting food for the winter, if the hawk overheads, then they'd have to have a hiding place. So there would be one single hole where they would hide out. So if you set a trap there, then you would keep catching also. We used to carry a large, like a butcher knife, maybe blade would be 10-inch blade, and that's how we cut our willows to tie our trap to and shove it down the ground next to the hole. And how we set the trap in the hole was we would have to flatten the mouth of the hole, squirrel hole, and then put your trap neatly, or so, because if it's not, the ground is not flat when you put the trap in, if the squirrel steps in or is coming out, it might just miss it some way, and when you come next morning to check your traps, you'll just see a closed trap, no squirrel in it. That was the way we hunted squirrels in the summertime. In the springtime hunt was different, because when the squirrels comes out, springtime on it, they generally come out, they seem to know that in the spring when the snow comes, they want their holes to be covered up. And their what the winter holes they prepare is very small, and there's no diggings outside of it. It'll be maybe 2-inch diameter, just plain hole. And they were kind of hard to find. And when you're hunting in the summertime, then fall time, if you ever find one like that, just a hole in the ground, you know it's going to be their spring hole to come out. And there was a reason for that. In the fall time, you know, just before freeze up, you have those heavy rains. I think in order to keep the rain out and flow into their holes, that's how they made that little springtime hole to come out of. And also then the snow don't fill it up. So in the springtime is different when you setting your traps also, because in the springtime you're not the only one that is hunting squirrels. There's other predators like the eagle flying around, and also the falcons, owls. And when you see a squirrel, you know, sitting or on a snowbank, you go to it and you fix up the hole inside of the hole where you can make a place for your trap. And Mama used to bring grass she picked in the fall time, or those days we used to wear mucklucks a lot, and she used to pick these gillinmucks, they call them, a certain kind of grass that grew around the lake. She'd fill a gunny sack, enough for our grass soles for our mucklucks, and for springtime when she went squirrel hunting, and she would bring these grass in a gunny sack along with us too. And when we set our trap, after we enlarged the squirrel hole springtime through the snow, we'd put little grass underneath the trap, because you know metal, when it gets warm, when the sun hits it, or when it's warm, it'll melt the snow down, and during the night and springtime it's still freezing, it'll freeze, and that's how there's a chance of you losing your squirrel when it comes out, because the trap is, you know, melted through down to the snow. So the grass prevents it from melting through. And since there's eagles and falcons that would see the squirrel if it was caught, we would, with this 10-inch blade knife, we'd cut a chunk of snow and flatten it on the bottom side, where we're going to lay it over the trap, over the hole of the squirrel, and over the trap that's inside. So if the squirrel then comes out, it would be hidden from the other predators, because sometimes if you don't do that process, you'll find that the hawk or the eagle have flown away with your squirrel in the trap. But in the springtime then, when we were out squirrel hunting, and to save the meat, we always got our flour in white 50-pound sacks. And Mama would save those 50-pound sacks. And then when we got done skinning the squirrel in the springtime, instead of salting them down in the springtime, she would have us dig a hole in a snowbank and bury that flour sack, just now starting with some squirrels in it. And as the days went by the time we got done squirrel hunting, that 50-pound flour sack would be plumb full of squirrel meat, and we had to haul that home too. And those days, like I said earlier, we had no refrigerators, we had no deep freezes, and if there was hardly any snow to bury them back into a snowbank, she would kind of salt them down, but by then, they would be almost done, almost gone. So that's the way we hunted squirrels. And other times, when later in the spring, when they're really running around, like when the females and the young ones come out, if you have a 22, if you catch them, run across them away from their hole, you can shoot them with a 22. That's what Mama and her older sister Altai used to like to eat. The ones they say that didn't wiggle in the trap. So we didn't. If we shot one, we didn't have it. We never did taste it. It was them that ate it. In the springtime, before the fish came, Mama would start tanning her squirrel skins, because she didn't want them to get too dry and brittle, because you had to work on those squirrels, and I used to help her. Ruth and I, we would first rub the squirrel skins with canvas gloves, rub them as soft as we can the first stage after they were dried. And after they're dried and we're rubbed, Mama would then take a dish pan, a basin rather, put little warm water in there, not hot. She didn't want to cook the hides, and dissolve little of that felt naphtha soap, and that's how she dampened them. And she would roll two together, gave them enough moisture, and pack them down in a pot, old pot, that she didn't use anymore, cooking pot. Roll them together and lay them tight as she could in this bowl pot, enough where she would be able to work that during the day next day. And next morning when she got up, then she worked on those skins all day, rubbing them, and then from the heat of her hands and rubbing them when they were pliable, she would put them on her stretchers. She had a whole gunny sack full of stretchers that were made from blazer boxes. I still have some of those stretchers she used to use, and they have my grandfather's name, Peter Kern General Store. What was one of those things that keep in a cool place with those signs still on them? So I learned how to hunt squirrels and skin squirrels and how to tan them. And now at my age, I have been making parkies. For men's parkie in springtime, 45 was enough for a man's parkie, because these were prime and male skins. Then the females that would come out soon after the males came out of their holes, Mama, I believe, would set to make a set. One parky would be 55, or maybe if they're small, she'd have 60 to make one parky. And of course, then the smaller squirrels would come out of their dens last. The young ones, going on year old, maybe even 2 years old, and they would be probably 60, 65 to make one parky. Because when they make the parkies, then after they're tanned, they have to take the bellies off, the belly skin, because it's much thinner than the back of the squirrels. And same thing in the fall time. Springtime we got about 4 sets of parky. And in this fall time, if I remember correctly, we would get about 5 or 6 sets for a parky. Of course, she didn't make adult parkies all the time with these skins. She made parkies for her grandkids, like Uncle Pete's children, Betty and Billy. And I wasn't very built heavy, so I probably didn't use that many skins for my parky. The difference between an inside parky and the outside parky is the inside parky is made where you wear it with a fur next to your body, and for that there was the reason why you make a cloth parky, what they call now husbak, of calico. You can make it any corduroy or any other kind of material you want to use. If you want your parky warmer when you go out, you can make it with a heavier material. But when I was growing up, even now, most of the ladies use calico, printed calico. And what you do is you can put rick-rack or tape, and I knew a lady that crocheted a border for hers. She crocheted a border about 2 inches wide, and then of course sewed onto the cloth parky, the skirt of it. And there's 2 different kinds of cloth parkies you can make. You can make it straight down with no ruffle on the bottom, or you can make one with ruffle skirt. And I remember when I was younger, the elders ladies were always wearing the striped material. They seemed to prefer the striped material. While we younger, we like to have the flowery type, or sometimes plain material. And the outside parky is with a fur outside, and when you're traveling by dog team, you wear a outside parky with the inside parky inside. The outside parky the fur is on the outside. The inside parky, the fur is next to your body. That's the reason why it's really warm. You can travel at 20 below and even more, and still you'll be nice and toasty in this double parky, inside and outside parky. And of course then they both have ruffs to break the wind from hitting your face. And those days also they had mittens. Some were made out of dog skin, any kind of skin you have, or with a fur inside and probably canvas or khaki on the outside. In those days when Uncle Pete and my grandfather were driving the mail team, they both had inside and outside parky, also dog mittens or any kind of mittens, and mucklucks Some of the mucklucks they wore were made from seal skin or from reindeer leggings, because they have to dress warm and travel, because you never know when the storm will hit the trail. If you folks have seen fancy parkies, that type of parkie was called atkalti. That was the name of the style, atkalti. It had a fancy hood with mostly calfskin and some beads and strips. Even some of them would have a strip of fancy work on it. And of course the pieces of wolverine, they hung in the front and on the fancy work on the just below the rib cage. There would be fancy work there, and they put wolverine strips and also in the back. I'm sure most of you have seen fancy parkies. And then there's a lesser fancier one. It still has a fancy hood with calfskin, and like the one I described for the atkalon, and a border, fancy border, is Nachauraq. That's the only names I know of those two parkies, but I don't know all the reasons why all this fancy work is on them, or different kinds of material, because that atkalon and the Nachauraq have the calfskin, and on the hood they have, when Mama first started making them, they used to use little pieces of red felt, but to save time, I guess Mama started using red beads, spaced out maybe 1/4 of an inch, or maybe even 1/2 an inch. And there's land otters they use for this strip on the fancy part, just 1/4 of an inch wide apparently. And they have wolverine for the rough, not really the fancy parkie, but the wolf skin. And what else was it? Of course it's made out of squirrel skins. The body part is made out of squirrel skin. I think that's about all I can think of the type of furs they used. And in the olden days, before the calfskin came, they used summer skin for fancy work from reindeer. When they lose all their heavy fur and the new fur came in and it was thin, they used the black spots. You know, some reindeer are spotted, or they have white patches and black sometimes, or brown patches. That's what they used to make the fancy part. But later on, my grandfather ordered calfskin, and that's how Mama started using calfskin black and white to make the fancy work. Our house was a mile from the Bonanza River where the ferry was, and so it was the first building when you came in from Nome you got to. And there was a slough that ran close to the house, and a couple times we would see a seal in that slough, high tide, and I had learned to shoot a 22, so I would go down and shoot this seal. I caught 2 seals in that slough when I was growing up. Skinned it, and I think my grandmother helped me tan it, or showed me how to tan it. And I remember with the first seal I got, I made myself a pair of mucklucks from scratch. And with my grandmother's help, I tried to sew on the soles. And I remember clearly when my Uncle Pete saw the new boots I made, he said in Eskimo, So that's the way they're going to be again. I guess that meant I didn't do a very good job in putting the soles onto my new mucklucks. And from that, from around around the place, when you go out, you see um, there's a bunch of lakes and that slough, of course. And Mama had a single shotgun when the ducks came in the fall time and were sitting on the slough or the lake next to the further over. He would call my grandmother, Akang, he called her that for Akak, mother, in Eskimo. There's ducks out there. So Mama would get her single shotgun and sneak up to the ducks and bang. She'd sometimes get 2 at one shot. So we would have fresh duck for supper. You have to realize then, those days, we didn't have a deep freeze, no refrigerator, and everything we caught, we ate fresh. And then when the berry season then came, we used to camp out to where we could pick berries. Like I said earlier, we had no other transportation except by boat, or we had to walk to the berry patches with our pack sack with a 5-gallon Blazo can or Pearl Oil can, wash it out and put it in a backpack. And that's how we carried our berries when we packed them home. And especially the salmon berries were heavy, probably 40 pounds, 45 pounds if you fill a 5-gallon gasoline can, which carried 5 gallons. And we traveled nothing but by boat to these berry patches. First, berries that were ready to first ripen was salmon berries, then the blueberries, then later in the fall we would pick blackberries, also cranberries, because at that time too we didn't have any deep freezes to keep our berries frozen as soon as we bring them home. And when we walked to these berry patches, we had to carry a 50-pound wooden barrel, and if we filled that wooden barrel, we left it out in the tundra, made sure it was covered well. And winter time, when the snow came, probably in November, they'd go out and go get it with a dog team and bring it back home. It could be 1 barrel or 2 barrels. One year there was John Mulligan. He was a geologist. He was, doing assessment work in the Fish River flats, and he left a cat there in care of my grandfather. So my grandmother talked my grandfather into using that cat 2 summers in a row in 42 and 43. I remember those years very plainly because one of my member of the family had a child in 43. So going by that, I have that memory. The last time we went was 1943. The first time we went with a cat, my grandmother had us load on 6 barrels, 50-pound barrels. And there was Uncle Pete's wife, Clara, myself, Ruth, and my grandmother. 4 of us. We filled those 6 barrels. The berries were just thick at that time, about 4.5 miles straight back from Solomon. And we filled those 6 barrels, and then Uncle Pete, he had left the cat with us. And, before he left, we had made arrangements that in some few days, maybe 4 days, he would walk back up and drive us back home and with a cat and the 6 barrels of berries. That was 1942. In 1943, he brought us up with a cat, but he had to take the cat back to Solomon and left us there. And my grandmother, Mama, had only one tent, and she used it for camping, fish camp, to berry camping, and in the fall time we still had to go squirrel hunting in September. So she had asked Willet Ukitkun to come along. So there was 5 of us up there, and we filled another barrels, probably 5 or 6 again, but we left them all up there. But Mama needed to take that tent back. That was the only tent she had, canvas tent, to go squirrel hunting in September. So she and Willett took turns packing that tent down. And of course we just packed our sleep bags, our sleeping bags, and what other things we had, and left the barrels out on the hillside to be picked up winter time. It was a long walk, but we made it home, happy as can be, because we had 6 barrels out there. That was all the fruit. It was better than we get by with dried fruit and canned fruit, since my grandfather was he owned a store. But we still had to pick blueberries next. But we had a pickup. My sister, Ruth, would drive, and we'd go up the road and pick blueberries here and there. And naturally, we used berry combs. And when there's lots of blueberries, then 4 of us would fill a 50-pound barrel with blueberries one day. And Lee Brothers had a camp, but they also had a walk-in freezer. So Papa would keep his meat, like beef, mostly beef. I don't know if he ever bacon, because Lee Brothers had a mining camp 5 miles up the river from Solomon, because they were running now 2 dredges. That's that to be in the 40s, just before the war broke out into later 40s. So Papa would leave his meat there to Lee Brothers camp, and Mrs. Lee would order a barrel of blueberries for their use, and we would also leave our berries in their walk-in freezer. So because blueberries, if you don't freeze them or mix them with blackberries, they'll ferment just standing in a barrel. After all the berry picking, we picked also roots before the frost came, and she would put the machu into a big barrel without washing them. They're called Eskimo potato machu, and our roots would sometimes last till in April, because we ate them, the roots, with dry fish wintertime, dipped in seal oil. Also in the springtime, after we come back from squirrel hunting, my grandmother would go up the river banks, because it wasn't that far. Solomon River wasn't that far from the village. She would pick roots that had thawed out, was frozen all winter on the ground, in the ground. And we ate roots, fresh picked roots, and ate them with squirrel meat, because in the springtime the squirrels were really fat, especially the males and females, and used their fat to eat the roots with. And also, we went camping summertime to fish camp and hang bunches of fish to dry for our own food, for dry fish eating, and also for the dogs. When you hang fish, you really have to take care of them. When we moved down here, and my daughter's sister and our worker Mike Canada and my nephew Kevin Fagerstrom, they built a fish rack with a roof on it. And so when we hang fish, we were running the store. Before 9 o'clock in the morning, before we opened the store, I would go down there and check our fish that are drying to see if there's those house flies lay any eggs, and take a knife and clean them all off. And we made a solution of black pepper, salt, and garlic powder or garlic salt, and sprinkle the tails or wherever the flies are trying to lay their eggs, because we didn't want wormy dry fish. They sure don't like garlic, and they can't stand pepper. And so that was how we took care of our dry fish. At home, when I was growing up, like I've said earlier before, we did a lot of subsistence. So for meal time and lunch hour, Mom and I and Ruth, we always ate native food. And sometimes Clara, Uncle Pete's wife, we women, and with Clara's 2 kids, we would eat native food for lunch every day. Dry fish, sometimes frozen fish with dry fish, and roots, because we went root picking every fall just before freeze or even after a frost, and put away roots much of in wooden barrels. We'd go almost maybe 3-4 days just before freeze up and get plenty of roots for the winter. And then in the fall time, when the tomcods, when it first freeze, when the tomcods had their eggs, we'd fish through the ice and store those away. And that's how we ate, either cooked or frozen. And Mom was always going out fishing up Solomon River. Then we would also eat the trout, sometimes grayling frozen. Of course with seal oil and greens and what we have stored. Then also, when she and I went squirrel hunting, she would salt down squirrel meat in a 50-pound barrel. Salt them down, and during the winter then we would eat those squirrels sparingly. Or when we have company from White Mountain, there was one couple that when they came, Mama would make a special lunch for us when we came home from church. There was also other animals that were caught. Mama used to trap rabbits in Bonanza River. She would set traps and would check them with her dog team. She had 5 or 6 dogs to travel. She was still capable of running dogs. This was while Ruth and I were in school. She would had that trap line, and sometimes when the fox would follow the rabbit paths, they would get caught on her trap. She'd bring it home and skin it and make mittens out of it, or whatever she needed it for. So that was our diet those days. And of course, when some of the villagers went out for seal, they would bring us a pot or a meal of seal meat. Of course, my Uncle Pete too, he was, always on a mail run. Winter time he didn't hunt seals, but in the springtime um, they would go out with a boat and bring home ugruk and sometimes small seal, because mom, I think, preferred sometimes a winter seal or a small seal for seal oil. Up to now I eat only spotted seal oil or winter seal. I can't seem to whack that ugruk oil. It's a little too strong for me, especially in my age. So Mama would we would help Mama cut up the meat in strips to dry. So when it's partially dry or dry enough, not bone dry, she would put it in oil in a barrel. That was another kind of food we ate. And of course we ate a lot of seal oil during the winter for eating dry fish, machu, and other food we ate it with. And another thing was with Mama's older sister, she had two sons and they were good hunters. And there were times in the springtime when they start boating and hunting seals and ugruk. When they came home with their catch, Mama's older sister, Aldayuk, they would have a ugruk dinner. And so we would be invited at their place, and they would cook outdoors with a bonfire, and we'd all eat. That would be including Mama, Clara, Ruth, and I, and Uncle Pete and Clara's children. I think there was two of them. And of course, Dolly had a big family. Her two sons had children, and we'd all eat together as a family. More than, more than maybe summertime 2-3 times. And also on birthdays, they would have a meal together. Uncle Pete used to have his birthday on November, and Clara, his wife, would always put a village dinner for him where everybody was invited to the school, and Mama and her older sister Aldai used to make Eskimo ice cream together, which is tallow whipped up with little water and seal oil. Most of the time Mama used Western oil, and after it fluffs up like mayonnaise, they would put in boiled fish that was squeezed dry with a piece of cloth and flake it, and then add it to the tallow. And it took them maybe about 2 hours to make this mixture, which we called Eskimo ice cream, and put few blackberries in it. And that would be, it seems the favorite dish at the dinner that Clara would put up for Uncle Pete's birthday. And same way she did with Mama's birthday, since she was born in before the white culture came. They would just guess these elders' birthdays when they would say it was midwinter that they were born. Then they would pick out like December, January, February. So they picked out January 18th for her birthday. Also, if other people, if they guessed their birthday, they would say when the fish came in. They were hanging fish now, which would be June or July. When it was squirrel hunting time, then that would be about September. That's how they set the birth dates, by the seasons and what they were harvesting at the time. So, they had a day to celebrate their parents' or grandfather's and grandmother's birthday. So that was how we, was taught all that because of these two women. And that is still being carried on by my generation and even the younger generation after us. They know how to put away food because in the villages where you live, there is not like living in a city where you can get everything from a supermarket, and especially in the villages where we live, there's not any year-round jobs. Some have seasonal jobs, and another thing which really helps, is the fishing, commercial fishing, and commercial crabbing. They used to do a lot of trapping those days, but not so much trapping now in my area, but they still do. So what all I have learned was from these two elderly ladies that went through hardships before the white culture came. When we were camping, or when our grandmother and her older sister were together, they'd tell us, stories, not like storybooks, but about life. Especially when we were out camping, it was sort of like a lesson how to take care of our catch, and putting it away. It was drilled into us, so we will be able to survive. I think they were thinking, when they're gone, when we take over, when we get married and have a family to support. And they were always telling us, this was taught to them by their mother. Like I said earlier, before the gospel came, that if you catch what you can take care of, where none of it will go to waste. And she always told them, there's a watcher watching above, protecting the animals he has provided for them. And if then they just, get too many and don't take care of them and let them go to waste, then the person up in the sky that's overseeing all this, that is watching them, wouldn't bless them anymore, or give them, would you say, bad luck, that they won't be able to catch. And I would always, after I got older and start, hearing people's sermons and reading, that was scriptural. How we were taught by these two grandmothers how to live, how to store food, and how to take care of them. Because those days, there was no deep freeze, no refrigerators, no plastic bags. There were many things, in that line of survival that they taught us, and told stories about when they were young, about their families. In fact, my mom, she would talk about when she and her younger brother, she came from a family of 9 siblings. She was next to the youngest, and she had a younger brother. And they would, when they went camping to squirrel grounds, they would stay home because they were so low on food now. They would fall asleep before their mother and their older brothers came home with what they caught. So they had to still skin them and cook them. And it'd be quite late by the time the squirrels were done. And squirrels, you have to cook them well done. They're like pigs. They have trichinosis. You have to really cook your squirrels. I remember my grandma used to test when the squirrels are done by taking a fork and lifting the forearm. And if it did come up easy, then the squirrel was done. So they would wake up my mom and her younger brother, because they had fallen asleep waiting for them, so they won't sleep all night on an empty stomach, and give them a leg or a forearm to have something in their stomach till morning. And they also would talk about when you're real low on food, you take the willow bark, the water willow, what you can eat. They would scrape the top bark off, and the inside meat, it's white. They would chop it real fine, and if they have little fat or even seal oil, they'll whip it up and mix it, that bark, the white part of the bark, and seal oil, and eat that, so they'd have something in their stomach. That's how they survived. Although they had hard time, that whole family survived, and other families too, knowing how to make use of what they had. And I'm very thankful, that I grew up with those two women. I learned a lot, survival, and how to put away food, and how to store away food, and how to make use of furs. Iluitu yakti na umatin, ikchinak chuli. Ukbeklu agayon, ukbeklu nga wangalu. Unichumi nailain anoksu taunak, ikayok liwikpin. Ilaurak ikayok tau lumangmi. Ikchinailak kad au piutamini itok. Ukbeklu ila munarigay pini. Dinuk dunik chimaram ilauram. Bireli dakliwatin. Unichume naila wivilani kichingolu. Iluitu yaktik na umatin. Biarodit awatangik patin, ukdarodit lu. Ublo arikpan, paktak lewin tumikni. Iluitu yaktik na umatin, ukbere maglugu. Ilan ayok chimak lewatin.